Lifelong Chicagoan Ellen Shubart has worked more than 2 decades as a journalist, as well as serving as a college instructor and city planning advocate. Holding master's degrees in U.S. history and historic preservation, she has also written the Arcadia Publishing books Glencoe, Illinois, and Taylor Street, Chicago's Little Italy. Ellen now spends her time giving tours of Chicago architecture in collaboration with the Chicago Architecture Foundation. And with that, please enjoy the presentation.
Thank you very much, George, and I'm delighted to be here. What it didn't say in that fancy biography business is my parents lived here for 25 years, so I'm familiar with Lake Forest. And my husband and I lived on the North Shore for 40 years prior to our moving to Chicago. So I don't consider myself exactly a foreigner to the North Shore. So I'm so delighted that you could join me today. The name of the book is Secret, North Shore, Chicago. As I mentioned to a couple of you, the publisher for whom I write at this point is a travel publisher, and they've got a lot of books that are secret, Cincinnati, St. Louis. And they never heard of Chicago's North Shore, but I kind of convinced them that it was the equivalent of a small city in terms of all the wonderful, interesting things that are here. Included in the book, you'll find 84 unique places to either visit or explore. And the suburbs that I'm talking about for the North Shore are the ones that abut Lake Michigan, but also include the ones that are a little connected off to the side, like Deerfield and Glenview and Northbrook. So what is the North Shore? As I say, the municipalities that abut Lake Michigan. The idea, the name North Shore doesn't really come into the literature until the 1890s when an outfit called the North Shore Improvement Association was founded. It was a bunch of businessmen, and their sole purpose was they wanted to run a route from Evanston up to Fort Sheridan. This was formed in 1890. They don't get what they want until the 1930s. But this is where the terminology North Shore comes from. And then it gets picked up in 1906, the North Shore, what we call the North Shore Canal or the Sanitary Canal, was done by what was then the Sanitary District of Chicago, today the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. And then in 1916, you get the Chicago North Shore and Milwaukee Railroad, so they take the name up. And today, I think we can agree that the North Shore means an affluent residential area that runs approximately from Chicago's northern boundary at Evanston up to just a little bit under the Wisconsin line. These are the suburbs that are in there, with the exception of Skokie. I don't include Skokie, but this map came this way. But you all know where you are, so it's okay. And in the book, 84 different places, but you know, the subtitle of the book that I was tasked with doing was to find the weird, the obscure, and the wonderful. And I did that, but I also added what I think is one of our unique assets here on the North Shore, which is the natural. They're gorgeous natural sites all the way, you know, from the lake on in. And then I added 5 kind of gastronomic ones. And just in case you're not familiar with what you're looking at, the Mitchell Museum of the American Indian is located in Evanston. That lady who's hanging by her braid or whatever, the ribbon, is from the Actors Theater in Evanston. That big, vast look is the Techney Conservation Basin. Underneath is the old Grosse Pointe Village Hall. Underneath that, it says Gutenberg. That is a Edgar Miller sculpture that's on the Tech building at Northwestern University. The building in the middle on the bottom is the Jewish Reconstructionist Temple in Evanston, and then the building on the far right is Techney, and we'll talk about some of those as we go. So the weird, what do I mean by weird? Well, I took this to mean odd, silly, fantastic, and eerie. And as a result, folks, I went right to Lake Bluff. I don't know any other historical society on the North Shore that honors its ghosts. I don't know how many of you are here from Lake Bluff, but that whole ghost business is very different than what most historical societies are about. As you can see on the middle picture, that is this mystery of Elfrida Knack, who in October of 1928 was found in front of the furnace at the Lake Bluff Village Hall, which is in the middle there. And she refused to tell anybody why and how she got burned. She dies, unfortunately. This is the mystery. This is the ghost that theoretically haunts that village hall. I don't know of anybody else who claims to have a haunted village hall. Maybe there are, but this was certainly very, very weird. The next one is Techne, and this is weird in a totally different way. Techne was a mission, the missionaries of the Divine Word who set up St. Mary's Seminary. They were Germans who came to the United States and settled in an area where they found a lot of German farmers, particularly in the Northbrook Highland Park area. And this happened in 1896. They built this big, beautiful church. They have people who go all over the world, and they were a standalone town until 1989. At that point in time, the whole property of Techne was annexed to Northbrook, which is why you got that Techne Conservation Center that I showed you the earlier picture. The thing about Techne that's kind of weird is that up until the 1990s, every time a poll came out that said, who are the richest people by zip code, you would expect on the North Shore somebody from Lake Forest, somebody from Kenilworth, somebody maybe from Highland Park. But no, it was Techne that had the wealthiest people, because the pollsters just used to take the sum total of the church's assets and divide it up among the few monks and say these guys were the richest in the way. I worked for Pioneer Press. I hesitate sometimes to say that because when I worked for Pioneer Press, I considered it a legitimate newspaper. That's as much as I'll say about what I think about it today. But when this came out, we used to make a big joke about it all the time. Who's the richest on the shore? And it was always Techne. Okay, some of our roadways and transportation. Well, one of the things that is weird about the Edens Expressway as it comes all the way up is that there are no billboards on it. And not only is that weird, but I'll tell you, I think it's the weirdest thing. Everybody I know who reads the book or talks about the book, or when I get interviewed about the book, like on WGN, which I was, everybody asks about that. It seems to be the weirdest thing people like to talk about. But the reason that we don't have any billboards on Edens Expressway is not because there was federal legislation that comes later. It wasn't even the Eisenhower Expressway legislation that comes later. Early on, the Edens Expressway, which opened in 1951, the Illinois Garden Clubs went along to all the suburbs up against the expressway and said, you don't want nuisance placards. That's what they called billboards. And pass a law that you can't have them. And every suburb did. And so there are no nuisance placards. And they thought, wow, this is great. We're going to do it for all of the expressways in Chicago. Well, it didn't work. It's only ours, that only the North Shore that had that. The second picture is the picture of Sheridan Road. That 1890s group finally got a roadway. It was not what they thought originally when they asked for a roadway from Evanston up to Fort Sheridan. They were looking for a military road. Chicago in the 1880s, 1890s was a labor problem, a labor unrest city, and they wanted to have the troops right there so they could come marching on down if they needed it in the city. By the time this road is built, it's 1930s, and all the towns in the middle say, yeah, sure, I want a road but I don't want it straight through my town. I want it to look pretty. I want it to have some aesthetics. And so you have one of the most beautiful drives in the entire area through the ravines, on all the curves and everything. And that's Sheridan Road. And then the third thing is that in Winnetka, we have below grade train tracks. This happened because in 1937, it was the last straw. A young woman was killed at a grade level crossing in Winnetka, coming home from a Halloween party. The city father said, that's it. We've got to do something about this. And unlike Evanston, which opted to put their train tracks up and over the streets, Winnetka opted to go under a lower grade and put bridges over the train tracks to make it look prettier. They were able to do it, and they finished it during World War II. Just a little small secret, Winnetka is always so proud of being on their own, but they took money from the federal government to do it. And Harold Ickes, who was Secretary of the Interior for Franklin Roosevelt at the time, was very instrumental in getting them not only the money from the feds, but getting them the supplies that they needed during the war to lower the tracks in Winnetka. Glencoe, which is the place I lived for 40 years, wanted to do that. There's a lot of literature in their minutes of the village hall, but they never could afford it. So it's only in Winnetka that we have these. Okay, dry versus wet. You may all know all these stories, but the North Shore generally is dry. It was the response to Northwestern University in the South, Lake Forest College later in the North, religious institutions. They don't want their kids drinking. And by and large, until the 1970s, it was very hard to buy a drink. Except, you know where I'm going with this, don't you? Partially, first, let me say that there is a wonderful site in Evanston called the Francis Willard House. It's one of 5 buildings on the National Register of Historic Places District. You can go in there. This is the home of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. The woman who headed that was Frances Willard. She came from Northwestern, where she had been the dean of women's students. And she's the one who pretty much is involved in enforcing no alcohol, not only on the North Shore, where most of it was very voluntary, but all across the United States, and of course, ultimately gets prohibition. But there are places in the North Shore, if you knew where you were looking, where you could go and get a drink. The first one is the Plaza del Lago, which is the middle picture. You may just think of it as a nice place to go shopping. There's a Jewel, there's a Burhops. But when it was built in the 1920s and 30s, it was built, yes, as a shopping center, but also it had a ballroom, it had bars. And the reason they could do that was it was unincorporated. In fact, many of you in this room may remember what I remember. It was no man's land, right? You could go there and do all the bad things. If you were young, and you could go there and smoke, you could go there and buy booze, you could go and do other stuff. The Mar-a-Lago ballroom burned. That's in the area where today are all the high rises, but the shopping center part of it is still there in Plaza del Lago. And you can still go get a drink over there. There are now restaurants that are very nice. The other pictures are one on top of each other under the beer glass. The first one is the old Grosse Pointe Village Hall. There was a town on the North Shore known as Grosse Pointe. It's not just a street. It was a place. It was German immigrants. Most of them came from a town by the name of Trier, Germany. Guess what? They named their township New Trier. They were mostly agricultural, they were mostly farmers, and they mostly drank beer. The city relied on the income from the taxes they got from the 5 bars that were in the middle of the town, which is today on Ridge Road near where St. Francis is, if you're know Wilmette. St. Joe's, I'm sorry, where St. Joseph's is. Anyway, everything was going fine until more and more people kept coming to New Trier. And I got to find my date here. In 1909, they had a referendum that was township-wide. Do you want to have alcohol or do you not? Everybody voted they did not, except for Grosse Pointe, but they were outvoted. And at that point in time, because the 5 bars have to close, the municipality has no money, it dissolves. The building that you see here today is the Wilmette Historical Society, but it was the village hall for the village of Wilmette. And then I don't think I have to tell you much about Highwood. You're all very familiar with Highwood. And if you were like me, if you wanted to have a glass of wine with your spaghetti, you came up to Highwood because they had legal drinking. Highwood, because of its location across from Fort Sheridan, did have alcohol, not always legally having alcohol. They've always tried to live down that reputation of being solely famous for being wet. But hey, that's what they are. Today, they are a great restaurant town, and that's their story. Okay, the Great Train Robbery. This was the largest train heist until, I have to now say, until recently. I just, read in the paper, and I'm sure you did too, about all these guys who are stealing off the train, all the stuff that's being shipped by Amazon and just taking it. So I'm sure somebody has stolen more than $3 million worth of stuff. But at this point, this was the Great Train Robbery of 1924, June the 12th. There was $3 million of securities and cash and some jewelry on a train. A Texas train robbery group, which are the Newton brothers, came up from Texas and got involved with some Illinoisans and said, this is the best thing we can do. It was an inside job. They put 2 or 3 guys on the train. Train rolled on exactly the same tracks that the Metro North Line goes on now. You can just see it. And they start rolling up here, and as soon as they get out of Chicago, they pop out of the cabinets that they were in, and a gun goes off. It was kind of like the robbers who don't know which way they're shooting, because it's Willie Nelson who gets shot. He is one of the guys who's holding the gun, so probably shot himself. Anyway, they get up to Roundout, which is right outside of Lake Bluff, and that 4 Cadillac cars meet them there. That's the rest of the gang. Take all the stuff off the train. Although it was $3 million on the train, $2 million is recovered, $1 million, nobody ever knows what happened to it. At any rate, and they just followed Willie's blood. They found the doctor who fixed him, and they picked him up. The police took them. They were all, 8 of them went to jail, and came out of jail to talk about it, by the way. If you ever want to see something funny, there's a Johnny Carson on YouTube with one of the Nelson brothers talking about the great train robberies that he did. Okay, film locations. I have to say that I did this book with my husband, as I did 2 other books with my husband. He takes the pictures, he does the driving. He says, who goes to look at a house that was in a movie? We get there, there are 3 groups of people looking at this house before he can take the picture. So the Home Alone house, I'm sure you're aware of it. It's on Lincoln Avenue in Winnetka. It is a private house. You can't get in. The actual movie was filmed at New Trier West, which was closed at the time. And they built an inside set that mimicked the house that was there. The family who lived in that house stayed there through the whole shooting and have lovely stories to tell. It's a very favorite place, particularly since the movie is shown every Christmas. So it's become part of our heritage. The other are 2 sites in Glencoe. The middle one is where Ferris Bueller starts his day off at the Stan Schumann overlook at the Glencoe beach. And the second one is the Glencoe Union Church, which is where Molly Ringwald's sister in the movie. It's Molly's 16th birthday. Nobody cares. Her sister is getting married. She gets married in that church. That's the whole premise of the movie. Okay, the obscure. The obscure are things I think you maybe never heard about. maybe you have, but most people are unaware of them. And the first one is the whole influence of the Potawatomis. You know, today, most people do know that we live on the land that used to be owned by what the Woodland Indians were called the Council of Three Fires. That's the Ojibwa or the Chippewa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi, mostly the Potawatomi in our area. Down in Wilmette, the Wilmette family, that's where they get their name. Archange and her husband had 1,280 acres of land given to her by the US government. Why would the US government give a Potawatomi woman land? Well, originally they lived right across the river from Fort Dearborn, and they were suppliers of food to Fort Dearborn and doing what we used to when I was in school call the Fort Dearborn Massacre, which today we call the Fort Dearborn Incident, which was a clash between Potawatomis and the Fort Dearborn soldiers. She and her sister sheltered, shouldn't say it together, they sheltered soldiers, and I think that's the reward. So in the 1839, I'm sorry, 1829 Treaty of Prairie du Chien, she gets all this land. That reservation then ultimately becomes the village of Wilmette. This is in Gilson Park, all the way on the north end, not hard to find. The middle picture is the picture of the people who actually lived here. We did not have people who had big headdresses full of feathers. We had Indians who wore 1 or 2 feathers in their head. And this is from the Alvillan Tyner Interpretation Center at the Kent Fuller Air Station Prairie, which is in Glenview. And then, of course, there's a ton of information. Really wonderful place to take grandchildren, by the way, the Mitchell Museum of American Indian, because it's got a lot of great exhibits in their permanent exhibit about Indians across the country with a lot of touchy-feely stuff. You can put on Inuit mittens, you can touch the fur of some of the animals that they lived with and stuff. It's a very interesting place. Okay, how about the places where we honor American vets? Well, I think you know many of those places, but you may not know these. There's the Glenview Naval Air Station Museum. It's a heck of a place to find. It's behind 2 auto repair parts stores off of Lehigh Road next to the train. It's not open except on certain Sundays. Anyway, we finally got in there. Unlike your museum here, which was professionally curated, this is a chock-a-block museum. Everybody brought everything they could find and anything to do with the Glenview Naval Air Station, and it's there. If you notice, all these uniforms have a pin on them with a piece of paper. Susie Q brought it in, it was her husband's, that kind of message on the thing. But if you're interested at all in that, and there is a small portion of this museum that is dedicated to George Herbert Walker Bush, who trained at the Glenview Naval Air Station prior to becoming a pilot in the Pacific. The other is to look for, and they're in 4 different suburbs that I know about. They are in Wilmette, Deerfield, Northbrook, and Evanston, the Blue Star Memorial. What is that all about? Well, after World War I, the garden clubs of the United States decided that they weren't going to put up monuments. Instead, they were going to put up little gardens with a marker. And so there are gardens all over. Ultimately, of course, now they honor all veterans of all wars. And you can find them as you drive, and maybe you've seen them and just didn't know what they were. Okay, shopping stories. I'm going to run through this quickly. Dave's Rock Shop is a place where they've got a museum in the basement. You know, you have an exhibit here about the pre-glacial era. You want to know about the rocks, go right down to Dave's in the basement. They've got the whole thing out there. They also sell all kinds of stones and geodes and things that you can take home. Again, if you've got kids, it's great. They sell these big rocks and you take them home and you and then you open up and you have geodes and it's their present. The North Shore Exchange, which is in Glencoe, Wilmette, it's also in downtown Chicago, is a former thrift shop from Glencoe that's been transformed into an upscale boutique consignment store, where I understand the biggest seller is the Chanel bag from name your date, 1950, 1980. These are consignment designer stuff, both furnishings and clothing, and all the money goes towards charitable institutions. And then on the bottom, Market Square, the first auto-related shopping mall in the United States. You all should be proud of that one. The other thing is that on the North Shore, we have two towns. I talked about Grosse Pointe disappearing, but we created two places. One of which, of course, is the Glen, which is what's left from the air station, and the other is Fort Sheridan, which was made from the fort. This is a officer's house, now a private house. And in 1993, it was converted from a military fort to something that is now on the National Register of Historic Places. I should also say that the architecture there, George said, I am a docent at the Chicago Architecture Center. The architecture here at Fort Sheridan was done by Halliburton and Roche, and it's fabulous architecture. After this, the Army decides that's way too expensive, and they go on to they use in-house architecture, and nobody else has architecture like we do in a former fort. Okay, the Daggett Cemetery, maybe you don't know where this is. It's between Glencoe and Highland Park. Marine Township in Lake County takes care of it, but it is a pioneer cemetery, started in 1837 when Robert Daggett bought 160 acres of land. He was a settler, and he set aside a half an acre. It was an unfortunate story because he had 3 children, Anne, 12, Rachel, 21, both of whom died of what they called in those days quick consumption, or TB, and then a son, James, 18, who was injured by a falling tree. They're all buried there. It's the Daggett family, but there's lots of other families. He allowed his neighbors to bury their dead. He charged $1 for a plot, and so it's an interesting place to go. Half of the language of the stones in the cemetery are in German. Okay, the natural trails, hikes, bikeways, prairies, water. You know, we've got it all, and believe me, we've got it in spades. So the first place is the Grove. This is off of Milwaukee Avenue in Glenview. If you have not been there and you are into nature, this is it. It is a beautiful place. This is the museum in Robert Kennicott's house. This is a national landmark site. They've got the home of Dr. John Kennicott, who was the original settler in 1836. They've got Robert Kennicott, who was the state's naturalist, who founded the Chicago Academy of Science and the Northwestern Museum of Natural History, and explored, just in his spare time, Alaska, so that when we bought it from the Russians, we knew what we were getting. They also have, besides this interpretation center, they have trails, they have a schoolhouse, and they have Indian teepees, spelled T-I-P-I-S, these rounded wooden constructions that the local woodland Indians lived in. It's a great place. If you're wondering, the turtles are live, the bear is not. Okay, prairies, savannas, trails. I mentioned earlier, the picture in the middle is the Kent Fuller Air Station Prairie. This is the basic remnant of the prairie that the white settlers found when they came across the United States. And the reason that it is there like that is because the air station never mowed its lawn. Or no, the air station always mowed its lawn. I lost the joke. Okay, here's the deal. The air station, when it was founded, they just laid the runways over the prairie and then they mowed the rest of it. They never got rid of it. They never put any chemicals on it. And so when the air station was taken away, they pulled up the runways, and the plants that come back go all the way back. Their descendants go back to when the 1830s, when the first white settlers were there. So if you really want to know what prairie is all about, you can go there. It doesn't show it here, but this stuff was close to up to our shoulders. The other one on the bottom is the preserve in Highland Park. They're just getting started. They are recreating prairie and bikeways and stuff out of an old golf course. And it's well worth going to see, but don't expect much. I mean, they have a maze where the plants are about this big. Well, you don't get lost in a maze like that. But they're on their way. I mean, it's going to be fine. Then there's the Skokie Lagoons, and this is the best big mouth bass fishing in northern Illinois, according to the Department of Natural Resources. And I think you're familiar with all the lagoons. Certainly one of them is where the Botanic Garden is, but these lagoons were formed by the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, in the 1930s. And today you can rent a kayak or a blow up or something, or you can go fishing. Now, we have a lot of Jens Jensen in specialty parks. Jens Jensen Park, actually named for him, is the one on the left, and that monument in the middle, that big rock, is named for Augusta Rosenwald, who was the wife of Julius Rosenwald, who was the big known philanthropist who was the head of Sears Roebuck. But Augusta, I'm told, had her own checkbook and did her own philanthropic donations. In any event, she was a big promoter of Jensen, and one of the reasons why Jensen has a lot of private landscapes up here. The second picture is of Mahoney Park, which is a Jensen design park, and it runs on either side of Sheridan Road, right through the entrance at where Kenilworth meets Wilmette. This is one of those circles that Jensen was so favored and loved to have in council rings, he called them, in all of his parks. We also have, I'm not sure you're aware of the Merrick Rose Garden in Evanston. If you know Evanston at all, there's something called Fountain Square that has no fountain. Well, the fountain is in the Merrick Rose Garden. So there's the fountain, and then there are roses, and they are replanted every year by the Rose Association of the United States. Huge, wonderful roses, lots of placards about all the people who donated and stuff. It's a lovely place to take a quick walk. And then the Shakespeare Garden, which is on the campus of Northwestern University. And it has in it plants that Shakespeare names in his plays, at least the ones that'll grow in our environment. Okay, then we get to the wonderful, which is most of what I like, artistic, historic. And here we are. This is the Thayer Avenue garage doors in Evanston. Not too many people know about this, but if you go down on Thayer, behind Thayer Avenue in the alley for 2 blocks between the 2300 and the 2400 block of Thayer, you will find a series of garage doors painted in 2019 by a woman by the name of Teresa Parrott. And she just did it because she thinks that everything should be beautiful. And there you are. There's dogs and flowers, and there's one with an elephant. It's a gallery of outdoor garage art. These, I didn't even put the names on them because I think everybody understands these architectural gems. Why are these secret? Well, I talk about what makes the Baha'i temple sparkle, and that is the crystals that were embedded in the concrete panels that were precast, which is what made this thing so fantastic. You're more than welcome to go visit. They have a big tape about the Baha'i faith, but also about the building. And the building is 9-sided, and it's got 9 gardens, and each garden is different. So it is really contemplative and beautiful. The building on the other side, you may not be as familiar with. This is the Church of the Mormons, Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. It's in Glenview. It is not open to the public, but I have it in the book because it's a spectacular architectural building, and you can walk the grounds. The grounds are open, and there's a garden there. The fellow on the spire in the inset is the Angel Moroni. Okay, I have a lot of churches. I'm not going to do them all, but the windows at the Lily Reed Holt Chapel, I'm sure you're all aware are Tiffany windows. You also have Tiffany windows at the Presbyterian Church. But the one on the bottom is from the Kenilworth Union Church, which is an 1892 building, and it was the first non-denominational church in the United States. And so they have windows for each of the denominations that are included in the church. This is Swedenborgian, which was the religion of the architect Daniel Burnham, but also the founder of Kenilworth, Joseph Sears. And then the far one is Alice Millar Chapel on the Northwestern campus, which is done by a Belgian by the name of de Sully. And this is totally non-figurative and very mid-century modern. And you go into this chapel and it's all stained glass. It's gorgeous. All right, we have a lot of famous architectural work here. I told you I am a docent. I go for these kinds of things. In Glencoe, we have Frank Lloyd Wright. We have more Frank Lloyd Wright houses in Glencoe than any other except Chicago and Oak Park. It's the third largest collection in the United States. This is a marker to the Ravine Bluffs development. The next one, you may say that's not even a building, and it's not. It's Crow Island, but Crow Island School, which was built by Dwight Perkins, who is a very well-known Evanstonian, but also the main architect of the Chicago Public Schools. And the school that was built, Crow Island School, is built on a child's level. Every door has opening to the outside. All of the furniture, which was done by the Eliel and Ariel Saarinen, is to the ground. It set a benchmark for elementary schools when it was built. And then in Highland Park, there's the John Van Bergen Braeside School, which is a prairie style building, even though it was built in the 20s. He didn't give up on the style. He kept it, and it's built over a ravine. I think you know that we have environmentally sustainable architecture. On the left, I mentioned the Jewish Reconstructionist Temple in Evanston. Before, the architect here is Carol Ross Barney. And in both cases, these buildings have net zero footprints, meaning they do not radiate out more energy than they take in. They make their own energy. In both cases, it's because of the solar panels on the top of the building. The other one is called Techni Prairie Facility Center. A very not wonderful name, but it's a fitness center. It's the Park District in Northbrook. And this was designed by a woman by the name of Lois White. Interesting that they're both women architects on this, but they're both carbon neutral. Okay, what about contributions from the Black community? Well, you all know about the First Baptist Church. I always say to other audiences that in 1834, the first Blacks in Lake Forest came. They had an AME church here, but that did not last. The Baptist Church starts in 1900 and is still going. The other thing that I talk about is Shorefront Legacy, which is a result of the efforts of somebody named Dino Robinson. It's located in the basement of a church in Evanston, but it is the archives of the Black community on the North Shore. And as you can see, it is a huge library. He has spent his life collecting this stuff, and it's a fabulous resource if you're interested in Black history. We have the performing arts. I mentioned the Actors Gymnasium in Evanston. I would also mention the Writers Theater here in, I'm sorry, not here, but the Writers Theater in Glencoe. Again, Jeannie Gang, a woman architect. Gastronomic, you know, these are just places that are holes in the wall. You may have been to Beinlich's, which is today in Northbrook. At the time, it was an unincorporated Glencoe. Again, it's a wet place to buy a drink during Prohibition, during those years when there was no drinking on the North Shore. It's still there today. It's a hole in the wall. Shrimp cocktail's the best thing. Mustard's Last Stand. There are lots of hot dog stands on the North Shore. I picked this one, which is right next to what used to be Northwestern's Welsh Ryan Arena, the stadium, it's gone, gonna be gone now. But I picked this one because this guy, the owner, was inducted into the Vienna Beef Hall of Fame, so. You gotta rank these in some way, but we all know how important, Chicago hot dogs are. Hackneys, they date from, the Second World War, when they sold sandwiches out the back of their house, including to all the guards who were at the station, in what is today, Forest Preserve, who were guarding German, prisoners of war who were located there. The prisoners of war were not allowed to eat at Hackney's, but the guards did. And, the two fellas over on the left-hand side are two of my three grandchildren. When they came here from New Jersey, we had to introduce them to, of course, the Pancake House, because you gotta go, to the Pancake House. Okay. I just wanna, say that, there's much more in Lake Forest and Lake Bluff, including the Presbyterian Church, including the cemetery. And, this building is in the book. And the reason this building is in the book is, I went to, I think, every historical society, history center, whatever they call it, up and down the shore. And I don't mean to denigrate anybody, but folks, you got it good here. This is by far the best of the best. The others I mentioned, I think Wilmette has terrific exhibits all the time. Glencoe and Winnetka are in old buildings, old homes. They've got good exhibits, but in smaller spaces. You get to the thing I mentioned in Glenview. That's not the Historical Society, I will say that. But, where people are trying very hard to save their heritage and know. But the only one I chose to put in this book was this one, because I really think it's by far the best one. And the reasons are a number, but I'll tell you just quickly: the touch screens, the variety of things that you can learn, and the comprehensive nature of it. Starting from the glaciers all the way through, that's, to me, it's very important.